Hello everyone. Today we are going to learn about the still life. The still life is, let me write this out. Still life. Yes, exactly how it sounds. The still life is something that is in front of you, that is still, and it is in real life. It is objects that you lay in front of you, you set in front of you, and you draw them or you paint them. It is exactly what it sounds like. A still life drawing or a still life painting is a form of observational art. Like you might look at a person in front of you and paint or draw an image of the person in front of you, that is portraiture. Or you may go outside and paint the landscape in front of you, that is called en plein air. This, when you set inanimate objects in front of you and you paint them or you draw them, it is called a still life. And this is one of my favorite still lifes ever. Vincent van Gogh, Sunflowers. And he had tons of these. And I thought that I just had to show you this to start with. Still life. This is what we're going to learn. So what we're going to do is talk about how to get there. And there's a few steps that we have to do in order to get there. In order for you to make a still life, you need to learn the first couple steps. In order for you to set up the objects, draw them out, the first couple things that you have to learn, for one, is the value scale. And the value scale is the range of values, the range of lightness to darkness for all colors. For graphite pencils, for colored pencils, for watercolors, for acrylic and oil paints. This is how you learn this. It goes into not only drawing, but it goes into painting. And this is an example of how it goes from the lightest to the darkest in the gray value scale. That's what this is called. And then you can apply this to all colors. But what you want to first do is understand what that means. What that means is it is creating a form. Whenever you transform a shape into a form, you are adding value. So transforming the circle into a form is because you are adding value. You transform this flat circle into a voluminous shape by adding value, which creates highlights, lighter areas, shading, which creates shadows from the lightest to the mid-tone to the darkest. There are reflected shadows and cast shadows on the surface that that object is sitting on. This is therefore no longer a circle, but it is a sphere. So how you get to this is by understanding how to move your drawing material with the lightness or the heaviness of your hand. And that is what you get to whenever you practice this. This is the first step in learning how to create observational art. When you learn how to move your pencil from the lightest to the darkest, when you learn how to mix your paint with the lightness, the mid-tone, the darkness, the tint, the tone, the shade. But we are going to start with the pencil. We will get into mixing paint down the road, but today we're going to start with pencil because I want you to be able to do this in your style. I want you to be able to set up those objects, and I want you to be able to create this. And there's so many different ways that you can do this, but this is the start. So I'm going to show you how to draw out a value scale, and then you're going to learn how to create the forms, how you transform a circle into a sphere, a square into a cube, a triangle into a pyramid or a cone, and a rectangle into a cylinder. And you do this with one line, one value at a time. It takes patience. It really does. But most good things don't come easy. So we will start with that. I get lost in my own notebook. I'm sure you do too. You get lost in your own sketchbook. I put sticky notes so that I know where to go. So I'm going to show you how to lay this out. Because what I want you to then do is you are going to then create a still life. And I'm going to show you these steps to get here. The value scale, the forms, creating the space, and then creating the drawing from life. And I'm going to give you the conceptual thought of what objects represent you. You want to ask yourself, what objects represent me? And you're going to set them up, and then you're going to take this learned knowledge of value and form and space, and you're going to apply it to transforming those objects onto your paper or onto your canvas. So, let's get started. In order to start this value scale, I highly recommend a ruler, and I highly recommend an eraser just in case. You can use an H pencil, you can use a B pencil, it is up to you. Whatever you are feeling is what you can use. But I highly recommend using a pencil to draw this out over a pen, and I definitely would not, for the purpose of this, I would not use charcoal. So what you want to do is you want to find a free page in your notebook. I'm running low. But you want to find a free page in your sketchbook. And what you want to do is you want to take your ruler. I'm going to choose my 2B pencil. And we're going to make one value scale for now. And you want to start with lining up. Let's do 9 values. You'll see that people do value scales ranging from 5 to 10 values as the base. I like to do anywhere from 8 to 10, so we'll do 9 today. So just line up. I'm going to make it up here. Line up your ruler, and you want to draw a line from 0 inches all the way up to 9 on the top of your ruler and on the bottom, from 0 to 9 inches. And outline the sides as well. Then you want to make a very light tick mark at every inch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 is already there. At the top and at the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 is already there. Then you want to line them up. You want to make the vertical lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. If it's not perfect, it is okay. This is how I laid out every single one here. You are free to fill up your page with these scales, absolutely. I'm just showing you one just to get you started. So if you want to make this all the way up here, you can also do this vertically if you want. It doesn't matter. It is really up to you, as long as you have that scale. So you can choose to start up here at the lightest or down here at the darkest. This is the highlight, where it is the lightest that you can possibly get, and this is the shadow, which would be the cast shadow, which is the absolute darkest that you can get. Now, whenever I am doing this, whenever I personally do it, I I tend to start with the lightest, but I know people who start with the darkest as well, and it is up to you, whatever you're more comfortable with. But no matter what you choose to do, you want to practice on the side. If you are just learning how to shade, remember this is smooth shading. This is how you are learning this to start, okay? Smooth shading. Instead of going back and forth like this to fill in the space, you want to start with this ovular motion. I'm doing this big so that you can see. You want to create an ovular, long, smooth, light movement. You want to create this blending technique that works for you. This is what works for me and a lot of artists that I know. It's the longest, skinniest ovular motion that you can do. It really helps with smooth shading specifically. You see the difference between straight back and forth and that long ovular motion. It makes it much smoother. It helps the graphite blend much easier. It helps fill in those white spaces. It really, really makes a difference. Now, of course, you can use this for many different ways of expression, like expressive marks, abstract marks. You can turn this into cross-hatching, which is a different form of shading. We are only here talking about smooth shading, so I just want to emphasize this. This is emphasized in realism, okay? I want to emphasize that. So you can, of course, explore different ways of shading. It's just today we're focusing on smooth shading. Cross-hatching is also utilized in realism. Da Vinci used cross-hatching a lot. It is also a form of shading in printmaking, so I just want to really emphasize that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I start this. If you are right-handed, you want to start on the left so that you don't smear it, because if you start over here, you're going to end up smearing it. And if you are left-handed, you want to start on the opposite side. So just remember that. You want to work with what works for you. So you start with just one square or rectangle, however you have it set up. And you want to slowly and carefully fill in one square at a time, and see how I'm moving in that ovular motion. And I am not going to do this entire value scale for you because it takes a long time, it takes patience, it takes a lot of effort, and I think that this activity, this skill in visual art is one of the most patience testing skills. Smooth shading for realism. This is what is going to get you to understand how to build your still life, how to develop your still life. Because the still life, it starts with you drawing out the shapes. It starts with you drawing out the objects, the outline of the space, but it is transformed with the value. The value is what creates the depth. The value is what creates the form. The value is what makes it go from flat to three-dimensional, so that it creates that object in front of you in real life, the still life in front of you. It creates it onto your paper. It makes it believable. Okay, now I'm just going to show you this one block. So you see how I really took my time filling that in, and I did the vertical motion with that ovular motion. Now, I'm going to turn it, and I highly recommend trying this, especially for the darker. Another way to help with smoothing it out is to then go the opposite way. So I did that ovular motion vertically. Now I am doing it horizontally. And when you are doing the dark shadows, notice how I'm not pressing very hard. I'm simply doing layers of mid-tone to build that darkness instead of pressing like this, because this breaks the fiber of your paper. You can of course do this, especially with expressive marks. For this though, I'm just asking that you try the much more time-consuming patience testing approach. So I would say this, what I have right here, is about the mid-tone. You will see right in the middle. So I want to darken this by about as dark as I can get with this. I would fill this in. You see how that takes time, okay? This would be this, and what I would do is I would fill in all of these with this mid-tone, and then I would go much lighter for this leading up to the lightest, the highlight. And here you do not want to leave the white of the paper for the scale because you are practicing the lightness of your hand. Here you want to actually try how light can I get. For the purpose of the value scale, you want to fill this in with the absolute lightest that you can get, almost like you're barely touching the paper. Almost like you are barely touching the paper. And notice I have been doing this for a long time, so I'm comfortable to be holding my pencil up here, but you see how light that is. I recommend to a lot of my students, while you are first practicing drawing, holding your pencil at the very end like this and turning it on its side, because it helps you have a lighter hand. Whereas whenever you're writing and you're holding it like this, you tend to have a heavier hand. And when you've been doing it for a while, you're able to be more comfortable with it closer to the graphite tip. But whenever you're first practicing, hold it at the end like this, and you can have a lot of fun with it as well. So this is how you practice getting to this, okay? I recommend trying at least one gray value scale and at least one color value scale. Now when I say color value scale, I mean I did this, what I just showed you, with a colored pencil. And you are free to try as many as you want. I did this with a graphite pencil, with a 4B graphite pencil. And then I used the primary colors and colored pencil. I used a black colored pencil, and then I did the color wheel with the primary, secondary, and tertiary colors for this, to try that out. So I want you to practice your value scale in any way that you can. This is step one for learning how to create a still life, for learning how to create portraiture, landscape. This is how you transform shapes into form, by adding value. So that's the first step, creating your value scale. Go for it. Step uno. The next step is creating value forms. So you see, this is much closer. This is much closer to this, as it is obviously transformed from a scale. And so what you want to do now is practice this. And you want to practice with these 4 basic shapes: the circle, the square, the triangle, and the rectangle. Now how you do this is you want to set it up so that you have just one at a time, and you want to add all values to every single shape. And what you want to do is you want to picture where your light source is. So what that means is you want to create this imaginary sun. That's how I put it. An imaginary light source. You don't need your ruler anymore if you don't need it, unless you want to use it to draw out the sides, you can. Whenever I'm doing this, I think of an imaginary sun as my light source. So I might draw on a sticky note or on a side piece of paper. I might draw my sun. Okay, so work with me. One second. You can't see it, I don't think. This sun acts as a reminder of the light source for my forms. And for how I drew this out, my sun is not coming from over here because the cast shadows are over here. It's not coming from here because my cast shadows are not straight below. It is clearly coming from over here. So what you want to do is you want to picture in real life. If you are standing outside and the sun is over here and you are facing the sun, your shadow on the ground would be coming off this way, down here on the ground. And this side of your body would be the darkest because it is facing away from the sun. And this side of your body would be the lightest because it is facing the sun. This is how you want to think about these basic forms, and this is how you want to think about your still life. In here, in this image, clearly, because of the cast shadows being directly underneath the objects, the sun is right here. The light source, it's not actually the sun, but the light source, the lamp, is right here. So therefore, the highlight, the lightest value, is directly under the light source, exactly where the light source, the lamp, the sun is shining on, what it is directly shining on, is the highlight, the lightest value. And on the opposite end, whatever the light source, whatever the sun is not touching, is the darkest value, the shadow, the darkest shadow. And then everything in between are the shadows going from lighter to darker, the midtones, okay? So that's what you want to think about whenever you are doing this. That's what this artist here puts in first. The lightest values, the midtones, and the darkest values. That's what you want to think about. Now, I'm sure that they first probably outlined it. It's not here. It's in this one. I wanted to show you. Here, this is when it gets really complicated, and it's super exciting when you can do this. When you can work with all white objects, I highly, highly recommend that. Because when you work with all white objects, you are literally working with all light and no color. So you are working with white, you are working with literally lights and darks of white with the absence of color. This is the best way to practice value in any capacity, whether it's drawing or painting, or collage, or sculpture, whatever. So this is one that I really love in this book, and you see the very start of how they laid this out. So they have these objects laid out, and you see how in each one of these, the objects are there, and then there is the drawing next to it, which is why I'm showing you this. They sketch out the outline of each shape, then they start to add in the values. They start to add in where the midtones are. This one has a really great example of how they leave the white of the paper where the highlights are, where the lightest values are. Then they very lightly shade in the midtones, and then they do add a darker expressive mark to show where the darkest shadows are. So I think that that is a really great approach to that you can carry with you as well. And here is another example where this still life is set up in front of this artist, and they draw the outline of the shapes. And then they start to add in the values very lightly. And then you develop it to the point where it is shaded in with smooth shading if you are doing the smooth shading technique. And here's another one that I wanted to show you that I really enjoy, that has the outlines with pen, and the darkest values, the shadows, are filled in, and the lightest are left with the white of the page. So with that said, you want to remember this is your purpose of learning this, to get to that still life. So for this, I'm going to quickly show you how I got started on this. I'm just going to show you right down here. No, I'm going to flip over. I'm indecisive, I'm sorry. So I have the circle into a sphere, the square into the cube, the triangle into the pyramid and or the cone, and then the rectangle into the cylinder. And I'm going to show you, so I was practicing eggs. So this is where I'm going to show you how to start the circle. You can of course use something to trace the circle if you'd like. And I'm going to use a darker pencil so that you can see it better. Circle. Square. So this is the way that you can start. Draw them real lightly. I'm just using a darker graphite pencil so that you can see it for video purposes. And then the triangle for both the pyramid and the cone. So I just sketched them out really quick. So I'm just going to show you how I transform those into the forms to start. So I'm going to have my light source. You can do this on your paper. I'm going to have my light source, my sun. I'm going to have it up here again. I don't know why I tend to choose the upper right corner, but there's my sun. Okay? So, because it is shining down this way, I want to take note. This is my darkest side here. This is my darkest side here. This, and this, and this. For the sphere, you can jump right into the value. For the cube, to transform it into the cube, there is a trick to drawing a cube, and there's many tricks to drawing a cube. I am just going to show you one right now. In order to draw the sides of that cube, you want to draw an angled straight line at the top point. I'm going to make the cube go this way. An angled line. Then you want to repeat that exact same line at the other top point of the square. So it is the exact same line at both points of the top of the square. And you want to repeat that line. You want to move on down to the right and repeat that line down here. Then you want to create, so you made 3 angled lines that are the exact same length. And you want to connect the top 2. And you want to connect these 2. if you want, you can of course use a ruler for this. I tend to do more freehand everything, so that's why I did that, but you are absolutely free to use a ruler to get those angles and connections spot on. Now for the cylinder. The trick with the cylinder is to erase the top line and erase the bottom line. And what you do is you take the bottom line and you curve it down just a little bit. Then you repeat that and you make the top line curve down just a little bit. Then you make a second top line that curves up just a little bit. So here you see you have the top of the cylinder, and you see you got the top of the cube here and the side of the cube. And now I'm going to show you the cone, where you erase the bottom line of the triangle, and just like you did with the rectangle, you curve the bottom line of the triangle down. And that's it for the cone. Then for the pyramid, you take the same approach that you did for the cube, and you want to take an angled upward line like you did for the cube, and you want to go to the bottom point and you make that same angled upward line at the bottom point, at one bottom point of the triangle. Then you connect the top point of the triangle to the end of that line. And there's the side of your pyramid. So based off of where the sun is, where the light source is, that's where you start. So now that I have turned all of the shapes into forms with the angles, now I will use them to create forms with value. So like I said, you can start with the lightest or the darkest. I highly, highly recommend leaving the lightest parts, the white of the paper, to start, and then add in the lightest that you can as you get to that point. What I do is I like to fill in most of the shape with a mid-tone, except for the absolute lightest parts. I like to fill in definitely the darkest parts with that mid-tone, and notice my up and down ovular motion that is consistent. And see, I am holding my pencil much differently than when I write, although sometimes I write like this. But it's very different from the traditional writing hold. And like I said, it takes patience, it takes time, and you'll want to do one form at a time. So see, I'm going to start to get much lighter as I get over here, because this is where my sphere would have the lightest highlights. And I highly recommend, for both the value scale and for this, please avoid, for now while you're just starting, avoid using your finger, because you want to get that blending down without your finger when you're first starting. And I'm going to make that much lighter. You can of course use your kneaded eraser or your plastic white or pink eraser to help get the lighter parts. And sometimes you have to use your finger to wipe off the eraser sheddings, but be very careful to not smudge your drawing when you're doing that. You can also put a paper underneath this hand so that you don't smear, but remember you want to work from one angle or the other based off of if you're right-handed or left-handed. Then I'm going to turn this, and I'm not going to do this entire form for you. I just wanted you to get an idea of how I do this. So with every layer, I turn it from vertical to horizontal to build up the shadows. These are tricks that I use in building realism, and I just want to share them with you. And then the cast shadow, because the sun is here, the cast shadow would be right down here, and that would be the darkest part. And I am not going to finish this entirely. I just want you to see how that transforms to this. So you want to do one at a time, one value at a time. Think of your light source. Think of the textures of your objects. Oh, this is breaking. And think about the colors of your objects. And never forget to start with the shape of what you're seeing and just look at it one shape at a time. Then add in one value at a time, starting with the lightest. And if you are confident to add in those darks, you totally can. And I want you to remember, this is the second step to getting to that still life. Learning these forms. The first step was the value scale. The second step is value form. Then the third step is making that still life. So let's do that. So we are getting to that still life one step at a time. We want to set up our objects so that we can draw our still life. The first step was learning that value scale. The second step is learning the value forms. And then the third step is setting up that still life. So what I recommend when you are trying this, I really recommend looking at how other artists do this. I think you know by now I like to show you how different artists do all kinds of things, and I will always do that because I think it's really important. So I'm going to show you how a couple artists have done still life. Now this has been a form of making in art, in all of art history and all of human history, setting objects up and drawing or painting what they see. This is an example still life with Ray and Basket of Onions by Jean-Baptiste Chardin. I believe that this was Ray. I'm assuming this was the chicken. And this was made in 1731. So this goes way back. This was the still life movement. And it goes all the way to the modern day. This was Paul Cézanne, who's one of my favorite painters. Still life with apples. This took him, it was 1893 to 1894. So just like I told you, this applies to painting and drawing, collage, sculpture. I want you to remember that the pencil is the beginning of the still life. Then you move from there. So I want to show you still life painting so that you can get an idea of how you can try that. I want you to try that absolutely as well. So this was Paul Cézanne. He's phenomenal. Another artist here, Henri Matisse, one of my favorite post-impressionists. This is still life with La Danse, his painting that he created, La Danse. This is a still life that he set up and made in 1909. Look at that color. Oh my goodness. He was also part of the Fauvis school. And here's another one that I just really love by Patrick Caulfield. How I want to emphasize, even though we're talking about smooth shading and realism, I want you to see how with these artists, this goes from Impressionism, Expressionism to abstraction. This is called Sweet Bowl in 1967. This was from the pop art movement. So I just want you to see how you can do this still life and you can find your style. So remember that. And check out artists of art history and all the different still lifes that have been created throughout time and how you can find your style in practicing this artistic practice. So there's that. And I want to show you my objects that I chose. So with this, the concept is, I'm going to write this on a sticky note for you. This still life concept. Remember, concept means idea. The idea behind it. I want you to think, what objects represent me? So the still life is an arrangement of objects that you set in front of you and you draw or paint them. I want you to choose objects based off of this concept, based off of this idea. What objects represent you? So I am going to do that same thing. So what I did was I chose a couple different things. I am going to look at this as one object. Two paintbrushes, and a drawing pencil, because I think you know why. So that's my one object. Then I chose these two books because I love to read and they represent basically who I am. I am an artist and I am an art teacher, and I am an intense nature lover, and I want to live like Thoreau did. I chose my elephant made of tea leaves that I got in China. I have coins in here, but this is an object that represents my love of travel. I chose this box that I received from a friend on the Navajo reservation to represent all of the quality, incredible, amazing, life-changing time that I've spent on the Navajo reservation with my dear friends there that have become like family. I chose a seashell and a rock as one object to represent how I love the water and the mountains, how I love being outside. And I chose my hourglass to represent how I meditate and do yoga and how important time is. So these are the 5 objects. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sorry, 6 objects that I am choosing for my still life. I want to point out, notice the difference in shape, in texture, in width, in length, in height, in color. This is something that I highly recommend when approaching still life. Getting a variety of texture, color, widths, heights, lengths, materials. I want that to be a thought whenever you are finding objects that represent who you are. So the next part is setting up your still life. So what you want to do is you want to have good lighting and you want to have drastic shadows. So I'm going to set this up in a way that, from my perspective, shows a variety of not only height, but has a variety of shadows. Has a variety of directions, directional movement. Creates a space. That's called visual interest. You see how this is a directional movement. This is a directional movement this way. This is vertical line, horizontal line, vertical line, diagonal line. And I want you to just see how you can switch and change these objects. Now, from your perspective, I think that it's interesting for you to see how it shifts drastically from 1 inch to the next, and how my light is shining on these and not shining on these depends on, or deciphers between the cast shadows placement. So you want to think about that when you're setting it up. And so this is how I set up a still life. These are the things that I pay attention to. If you would want this to be higher, you could set a box underneath it. If you would want something that is taller, find something taller. If you want something that is bigger, find something bigger. But I just want you to see how these can get set up. And I'm going to show you this from my perspective with the different lighting. And I'm going to show you how I am drawing them. Now that I have it set up with the layout that I like, the one that I feel has the most visual interest, and my lighting is set up, now I go to drawing it out. And I'm holding my pencil very loosely, and I'm going to start with one object and move from that object to the next. And I'm starting with my hourglass, and you want to first draw the outline of the shape, and you want to start with one shape to move to the next, and you want to look at the proportion, you want to look at the proportion of that object with the one next to it. So I notice that the book is slightly above the hourglass, so I would, and slightly in front of it, so I would draw that book in the scale and proportion that I see it. So the bottom of the hourglass ends about that far up from the bottom of the book. Then I would draw the elephant, and I notice the angle. The angle is a sharp 45-degree angle from the top of the hourglass down to the bottom of the elephant. And so I draw the outline of the elephant, and I go very quickly, and I draw the shape that I see. Then I'm going to go back up here and draw the edge of the book. I notice the angle of the box and how it comes down to right about where the top of the elephant goes. So I notice that it goes straight over from that elephant. And it is about half of the book. So I make it half. So you notice how I'm doing this very quickly to get the general shapes and proportions of each object. The seashell is about there. The rock is about there. The other book, the angle of it ends at the box, so I make it come out that way. And if you go off the page, just let it go off the page. It's okay. Especially when you're practicing. And you want to do this in your sketchbook. Practice it maybe a couple times, a few times in the pages of the book. And look, I got to the point where I didn't even have enough room for all of my paintbrushes and drawing supplies. And that's okay right now because I am practicing. So then I would look where the darkest are. Remember, when you are confident to be able to add in the darkest shadows, you can do that, just as you would keep the lightest lights and the darkest darks. And then the midtones, you can start to add those in. I'm just doing this very quickly so you can see how you do this. So I got glass, I have paper, I have tea leaves, rock, shell, wood, hair. We got all kinds of textures here. I find that adding in the darkest shadows helps a lot first. So then you keep going and you keep going. Add one value to each object at a time. I'm not going to do the whole thing in this video because you would be with me all day. But I just want to emphasize the key points. One shape, one value at a time. Find your own style, whether it's expressive, realism, abstract. As long as you get the gist of how to do this down, finding your voice as a visual artist is the most important part. And that is how you do that. One step, one value at a time. I cannot emphasize that enough. Look at each object as a shape, then look at each shadow and highlight as just one value at a time. I cannot emphasize that enough. Thank you so much for watching, and have fun making your still life.